Our next panel discussion is also about the future, but a little closer to home. We're going to be exploring the latest advances in picture and sound and the impact on production, distribution, and exhibition of motion pictures. Michael Karagosian will lead this panel discussion. Michael Karagosian founded MKPE Consulting in 1988, specializing in business development for entertainment technologies. He has been called by some a Swiss Army knife of digital cinema, having negotiated VPF deals, consulted to NATO for 11 years, and participating for a long time in digital cinema industry and its standards efforts. So welcome, Michael. Take it away.
We're already arguing that Dave's eating our time. So how many of you were here for the 9 a.m. session? There's a lot of science in that session. If there's any science on this panel, it'll be purely by accident. And our chief scientist just objected. So we have a great panel here, and we're going to be talking about the future of cinema. And just to give some background, we have over 100,000 systems now installed in the world, out of a total of possibly 130,000 screens that are operating today. Not all of those 130 are expected to convert, and then those will get replaced with new builds as time goes on. So we're truly entering a digital age. The things we set out to accomplish 15 years ago in converting the world into digital projection for cinema has actually happened. The good news is that it's DCI compliant. And of course, the bad news is that it's only DCI compliant. And that's what we're here to talk about, is that lots of new tools are available, we see a lot of new capabilities to tell stories. And that gives us a lot of food, or a lot of fuel to talk about what is possible in the future. And with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Starting on our left, Matt Cowan, starting on your left. Matt Cowan is Chief Engineer of Entertainment Technology Canada Limited. He is one of the original co-founders of ETC, the Entertainment Technology Consultants, and rejoined the company as Chief Engineer in 2013. Prior to that, Matt held the position of Chief Scientific Officer at RealD. He chairs SMPTE's on-screen light measurement study group and teaches color science and digital cinema courses for universities and industry forums. Matt has at least 15 patents and more on the way, and he's secretly proud that 2 are now in litigation. Next on our, following down from the left, is David Keeley, who's Chief Quality Officer and Executive Vice President of IMAX. He joined IMAX in February 1988, a real veteran, and was appointed, I'll get to the veteran part later. He joined IMAX in February 1988 and was appointed Executive Vice President of the company in July 2007. He is a real veteran of IMAX. David possesses a wealth of information about IMAX technology and history. His primary role is to ensure that quality is at the forefront of the IMAX brand. David and his team have completed post-production services on more than 400 films since 1972. That's how far back David goes. Next on our panel is I've got to shift around here because my notes are in the wrong order. Next on our panel is Howard Luck. Howard, you've changed. Next is Rob Hummel. Rob is president of Group 47, the company behind DOTS. DOTS is a 100-year-plus digital archival storage media format. Rob's career has evolved around cinematography, film formats, film restoration, animation, post-production, visual effects, and stereoscopic 3D. Is that all, Rob?
There's more.
There's more? Rob has worked for places such as Disney, DreamWorks, Sony, Warner Brothers, and rumor is he's worked for a lot more. He's played a small part in Blade Runner and Tron. In 1999, he led Technicolor's establishment of some of the first digital cinemas across the globe, screens 13 through 47 to be precise. Next, we have Mr. Weinstein. Steve Weinstein is CTO of Deluxe Entertainment, a leading provider of entertainment services. Steve has a background that spans technology, product development, and entertainment. Prior to Deluxe, Steve founded and served as CEO of Movie Labs, the research consortium of the 6 major Hollywood studios. Prior to joining Movie Labs, Steve served as Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy and Technology Officer at Ravi Corporation. And last but not least is Howard Luck, who goes by the handle How Weird. Howard is the Vice President of Production Technology at Walt Disney Studios. There he was responsible for helping incorporate new technologies into the studio's workflow. Prior to that, he was Director of Technology for DCI, where he was responsible for researching and documenting digital cinema specifications, and a longtime supporter and quite involved in the establishment of digital cinema specifications, I should say. And with that, please welcome our panel as we move forward. Matt Cowan, Rob Hummel, David Keeley, Howard Luck, Steve Weinstein. So I'm going to start this off by asking some questions. And gentlemen, you're free to talk as you feel fit to, but I want to at least start off with the topic of experiments. We've seen experiments that have been started in the industry. We've saw in this morning's session the 4,000 nit panel that Dolby has introduced, not to plug companies here, but certainly it has made an impact on the study of high brightness. And considering that and some other experiments that are going on with high frame rates and such, what do you find is the most exciting things that you've seen? And let's just walk down the line here. Matt, we'll start with you.
Well, I think the most interesting thing that's happening right now is the creative envelope of what's available to create in is expanding in a number of dimensions at the same time. Principally enabled by laser light sources, which allow for higher brightness, potentially much larger dynamic range, so not only more brightness, but darker blacks as well. Expanded color gamut so that the cinematographer has more colors available to him, and not so much with lasers, but higher frame rates. So the technology has come to a point now where all of those are coming together, and in the next few years we'll see practical implementations available that give us significantly expanded capabilities.
David.
Well, I can echo what Matt said. Higher frame rate is very important. Contrast, increased color gamut. I think those things are going to be interesting for filmmakers, but I do think that all these new projectors, including the new lasers that IMAX is going to bring to fore very shortly, they have to render regular images as we see them now, because filmmakers are going to have to learn how to use this increased contrast, increased color gamut, and it'll be a slow evolution. So we must make sure, as I've just said, that these images by these projectors can enable us to show old product and also new product as the filmmakers learn how to do that. And also sound. I've heard a lot of new things about sound. That will give new tools to the filmmakers, because what is it really about? As Chris says, it's about storytelling, it's a suspension of disbelief, and it's our job as technologists to make it easier for the filmmakers to tell their stories so we can be immersed in those stories, 2D or 3D.
I think what's exciting is that, kind of echoing what Chris Cookson said, it's what's going to happen in the future is the filmmakers are now going to have more of an infinite palette to play with. You know, DCI established frame rates of 24 and 48 as standards as a barrier to try to keep out television programs. You know, that was the impetus for it. When even in the early 2000s, we could make a QuickTime movie at 43 frames a second if we wanted to. And so frame rate, high dynamic range, I agree with you. It's not going to be like some filmmakers say, all movies will be 60 frames per second in the future. No, it'll be whatever you want it to be. We're expanding the palette of the filmmaker. But don't think any of this stuff is what's guaranteed to get the audiences in the theater. I was talking to Michael earlier. NATO did a survey in the late 1980s when a new technology was just coming into vogue, and they surveyed over 20,000 people. And they wanted to know what was the most important thing for them when they go to a theater. And everybody knew what the answer was, right? It was dynamic range, color, resolution. No, it was cup holders.
Clean,
It was
clean
cup holders.
bathrooms, right?
It's not a joke. It was cup holders.
Still one of the last inventions that's useful that I don't have in my own home. So I think it's, all about we've been talking about quality, both sound and video, and that's obviously, needs to improve, but it's, at some levels it's kind of starting to lag the home, right? So the challenge is how are you going to drag people back and, keep them coming to the theater? And I think it has to add some new aspects to it, whether it's social or even a more immersive experience. And I think those technologies are where we should be going now. If we just think about frame rate and we think about, even just, three-dimensional sound, I mean, I think that, we're really already behind. And so I think it's the next stuff that we have to get in front of people. Else we'll be sitting here in 5 years and people are going to say, well, how come the younger people aren't going to the movie theater? And how come the older people stopped going to the movie theater?
I think we're in probably one of the most exciting times that we've ever had in our lifetimes, all of us included. And I'm not going to repeat what the people said to the right of me because it's all true. But if you think about it right now, rest in peace, film is somewhat coming near to the end of its life. Technology is finally getting somewhat close to what film used to do. And if we look at the theater, for example, Vision Premiere stock still outperforms what we have as commercial theaters with digital cinema projectors today. Now that's coming in, changing very soon. But as a time period, no more do we have any of these bumper pads on our stuff technically as we proceed forward. We're going to have projectors that have high dynamic range. We're going to have high frame rates. We can spin whatever frame rate we want to in the future at some point in time. So as a technician and as a filmmaker and as an artist and creativity, just think of the possibilities that can happen. I mean, it's a very, very exciting time. Of those, I think the higher dynamic range is probably one of the most, largest improvements that we're going to see coming up in the near future. And we're seeing a lot of that stuff being talked about here today as well, too. And for a filmmaker, of which I'm trying to dive into that side now, I think it does offer a lot more opportunities to express stories that we could get close to, but couldn't get exactly where we wanted to be before.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Go right ahead, Bob.
I don't disagree with you at all, Howard, except an interesting point is granted the filmmakers are being given a wider palette, but a lot of what's been talked about today is how that we're competing against the home and the environment of the home. In 1994, for the Technology Council of the Motion Picture and Television Industry, we did a test where we shot Super 16, 185, Super 185, Super 35, anamorphic, 65 millimeter, same scene, same nodal point, all-day seminar at the Golden Theater at the Academy, laying it all out. One of the many conclusions of that day was that Super 35 was the crappiest looking 35 millimeter format. I mean, it really was. It was grainy, it was ugly. 5 years later, James Cameron shoots Titanic in Super 35. And I don't think anyone here thinks that it would have suddenly sucked more people into the theater. The problem is, the ethereal thing getting people into the theater is story. And that's so much more important than anything we're talking about here today about resolution. The story, I mean, Gravity. It was an unbelievably compelling story. People weren't walking out of Gravity. I don't know. It wasn't UHD. What do you think?
No, you must have story. I mean, I think that goes without saying on the thing. But if you look at a case like Gravity, for example, I mean, 4 years to make that. It was a super technical movie. And in the end, nobody walked out of it going, oh my God, I recognize, and where were the wires hanging center and all that kind of stuff, right? We just said, that's a freaking awesome movie. And we loved it and went back and saw it again, right? But with the enhancements of Gravity, at least for me, seeing it in an Atmos theater on a big screen with digital projection and being so clean, that was better than seeing a nasty print in a second-run theater with bad sound.
Touche.
Or seeing it at home on a smaller screen.
I don't want to watch that on my iPad, actually.
And it was great seeing it in IMAX.
Of course.
Of course.
Well, you've already started on my next question, which was how do we put this to work to tell better stories? Or just to tell stories that may not be possible today?
Well, I think that's a question for the creatives and the directors. Have we got any on the panel? Oh, Howard.
A wannabe, let's call it that way. I mean, I think I look at it this, I mean, this is the only analogy I can come up with, and it's probably not the best one in the world, but it's like we've been painting with oils for so long, and someone just said, oh, by the way, here's some watercolors. It's not better, it's not the best thing, and it's not for every story. But creative people will find ways to tell creative stories, just like they did with Gravity, of using all the technology was at their hand. So I think if you give filmmakers the opportunity with more tools, somebody's going to use it. Some people are going to do a horrible job with it, and some people are going to do a fantastic job with it. So it's just the fact that, that's why I think it's so exciting right now. You have all these new tools to experiment and play with.
Well said, Howard, and everything you're saying I completely agree with, but here's just something to throw out here. When I worked for Doug Trumbull and we were trying to sell ShowScan, I was in the early 80s. I was in elementary school at the time. We had a 10-minute demo film called Night of the Dreams. We'd show it at the National Theater in Westwood at the time. It's not there anymore, but it used to be a very big screen, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, 10-minute movie. Doug used to love to ask people after they saw the film, how long did you think the movie was? Invariably, people thought it was 25 to 30 minutes long. It was 10 minutes long, and it wasn't boring. It was wham, bam, action, sequence, stuff to boom, and consistently, everybody thought it was longer. They also thought it was TV. 60 frames a second. It's kind of interesting. But it was a 65 millimeter original, shot at 60 frames a second, projected at 60 frames a second, all film pipeline. But it was an interesting artifact there, and I've talked to Doug about it a couple of years ago, remembering that thing, that there's other things that go on when you're in a darkened room and you've got high frame rates going on. So it'll be interesting how you can use that in the telling of the story too. I like what Chris was saying earlier, how you might use many frame rates within a story, depending how you want to tell it. I'm sorry? I think that was the format because of a consistent result. Even with New Magic, which was a 20-minute long film, people thought it was an hour long.
I mean, one of the things I do, I think the tool set that now we're going to have available is going to allow us to have more versions of stuff that really is geared to the immersive environment that you're going to watch it in. If you're watching it on your iPad, rather than being upset that Gravity is on the iPad, you're going to have a different version that they've kind of cut or manipulated for the iPad. And given that everything is going to be in this, truly digital pipeline, and you're going to be able to get more feedback, I think the future is really doing many different versions of stuff and having the freedom to do it and gear it to the audience that's going to be watching it. Microphone.
That's
Live from Las Vegas, Michael
I thought I had a different
Caragosian.
mic, so this one isn't working, I guess. So I have a new name. So that says something about, do we need to be able to move content down into other formats? And is everything change is everything changing? I suppose we kind of know the answer to that, but is that an important part of this?
So we're there now. So for example, if you are doing your latest film and you do an Atmos mix, you're going to have to down-res that, audio-wise, down to all the different distributions you have to do. So you got to go down to a 2.0 at some point in time. So we've got that. When we do a high dynamic range, not everybody's going to be able to see high dynamic range. So you're going to have to do an HDR grade and then an SDR grade, right, as well, for example, to deliver that content. And you've got to get it across multiple distributions. Now the bad side of that is, and we'll find out pimping the next panel for IMF, please stay tuned. We're doing up to 35,000 versions now on a single film. Annie can say the number, it may be more than that. But with all the distribution channels and all the different formats, this stuff is getting just kind of crazy. So it's a blessing and a curse, but we found maybe you start with a high end, you do that, and you start trimming it down to those constrained distributions you have to get to at the very end.
Anyone else?
I actually think that's just the beginning. I think the future is you actually start targeting the various places where you think you're going to have that creative story make sense. So, I mean, right now you start at the highest quality and go to the poorest quality. I think you're going to choose that this one is much more immersive by yourself. This is much more immersive for the theater. And you're going to kind of change how you do it.
But the starting off, one thing I've learned in my experience is starting at the highest quality, at the headwaters of the process, yields you a better quality product in every downstream version that happens from there. Earlier we were talking, there was effectively a shootout in 2006 of 2K versus 4K. And during the rehearsals on the day before, I was with Bill Kinder from Pixar, and he'd brought a 2K version of Cars as had been released. And then they re-rendered the same sequence in 4K to show on the Sony 4K projector at that point. Now, granted, this wasn't high dynamic range projection, but it was, from a resolution standpoint, Bill and I were sitting there in the front row, so about 0.9 screen heights from the screen, and we saw on the left side 2K on the 2K projector, 4K on the 4K projector, right splitting down the middle, and the 4K cleaned the clock of the 2K. It was not even subtle. So then I called up to the projection booth and I said, okay, now what I want to see is, I want to see the 4K downsampled on the 2K projector and the 4K on the 4K projector. So Bill and I sat in the dark for a moment, talking, and suddenly the screen lights up. Bill and I both laugh because clearly they put the 4K on the entire screen. And I call him the walkie-talkie and I say, no, I wanted to see 4K on the 2K, 4K on the 4K. And he comes back, that's what you're looking at. And then he and I walked up to the screen to go, oh my God, you're right. But at one screen height away, the oversampling made the 2K projector look so much better. And that's a concern I have. Are we burdening some theater owners saying you have to go with 8K projection when really, actually, if you oversample, even your 2K projector looks so much better? And since we're not in the medical imaging business, it's about entertainment, not many audiences have been complaining about 2K projectors. David?
And just and contrast has something to do with that too. But building on this oversampling, that's exactly why Chris Nolan is shooting a considerable amount, or has shot a considerable amount of Interstellar on an IMAX film camera, because that, as he says, and I like to believe it's true, it's the golden capture mechanism, because it's 12K by 18K, if you consider 35 millimeter was 4 by 6K. So that's 18K of resolution. And if you go buy a Blu-ray today of The Dark Knight or The Dark Knight Rises, and you play it on your 16 by 9 television, you see the 240 portion that Wally shot in Panavision on 35, and then you watch it pop up to 178, which is the IMAX, you immediately see the quality difference. Why? Because of oversampling
Exactly,
that we're talking
David.
about. So it's still the gold standard IMAX, and my goal as Chief Quality Officer of IMAX is to try to get digital capture cameras that are, by the way, Bayer pattern 4 and 6K, which is a little bit different, to try to get those cameras up to the standard that approaches what an IMAX camera captures. And Chris is still sticking with that for the moment, and we have other filmmakers this year that are going to be shooting with IMAX cameras, because that's, no matter, even if you see it in IMAX film, or see an IMAX digital, or eventually you see it in your Blu-ray, it has that great quality difference because it was shot super high sampling of the original.
So it's the gold standard.
I believe it's
He's
still the gold
completely right.
But I would beg to say, though, if I had an IMAX with 10 stops versus a 2K with 14 to 16 stops, I'd go for that one before I went for the resolution.
There might be a fight coming.
He wanted controversy. He said that.
But he's Howard, you're right. I mean, like, look at the Alexa. Who saw, what was the James Bond film, Skyfall? I mean, who saw that and thought it was really compromised from a resolution standpoint? I mean, Roger Deakins made that camera sing. It looked unbelievable. It's one thing when I worked for DALSA. I mean, I got digital camera 101. What a lot of people don't understand is they go counting pixels, and they assume that if there's pixels, that if it's 24,096 pixels, they assume that those photo sites are capturing every photon that lands on across that space. Not quite so much. No, because the photo sites are often like, one actually taking up maybe 30% of the actual area of the sensor. It's one thing DALSA did so well because they had a sensor that was a photo gate sensor, which our U.S. intelligence agencies only use photo gate sensors, by the way, because they have incredible dynamic range, because the fill factor of the DALSA sensor was 86%. You don't have digital cameras with that kind of fill factor yet. And fill factor is a very important thing, but this is about cinema, right? This isn't about cameras. Sorry, wrong session.
But Howard, you're right. It's not resolution. It's bit depth. It's contrast. It's a lot of other.
It's everything included. Yeah, I'm poking a little bit, but
So what's going to bring people into the cinema?
cleaner restrooms.
Cup holders.
better popcorn.
Well, I think
be careful what you ask for.
I mean, you and I were talking about this. This AMC theater just redid a theater. It was this really grungy old Laemmle theater. Bless Laemmle's heart. I love Laemmle theaters, but it was pretty long in the tooth. AMC came in, redid the whole place. It's now electric reclining seats and beautiful cinema projection. They'll bring food to your seat for you type thing. And now people are lined up at the box office to go to this place. I think it's about the whole environment. I mean, I wish it was just about image quality, because I think IMAX images are the best things on the planet, but I'm kind of strange.
I think there's a couple things, actually. I think, and everybody's touching on a little bit of each one. One is, first of all, it's got to be a clean, safe environment. That's got to be the first thing to go, because you want a social experience. I know I want to get away from my kids and go to a movie theater where I don't have somebody messing around on a cell phone in front of me. That's the other thing, too, that annoys me in a theater if I'm trying to watch a film. But the other thing is really the story. It's the story stupid in the really beginning of it, and then if you add a really good visual and sound experience on top of it, that's something I'm willing to pay for. And with the home coming up so much now and so quickly on the technology side, we really need to pay close attention to this stuff in all phases of this, right? All the way through. It needs to be an event. It's exactly what David and IMAX do. They do an event. It's not just watching a small screen down at some place. It's going to see a big impressionable thing that you're not going to get at home. You're not going to get your screens in anybody's house anytime soon.
And one thing with that event, you've got to make sure that that event just isn't happening at your post-production facility or the premiere of the movie, but in all your theaters around the world. And a plug for us, we do a pretty good job of that in 857 theaters in 57 countries.
I mean, my kids are very sophisticated, and they balance out their viewing experience of what they expect, and their expectations when they walk in the theater is high. When they're watching on the computer, it's low. And so, it's not that kids don't care about quality. It's they expect quality when they want quality, and they don't care about it when they don't care about it.
But I think, it's just not the quality experience and being safe and all that. It's really important. But I think it's got to start distinguishing itself from what you're going to see in the home. I think whether it's, if you think about, years ago they used to have live music, playing along in the silent time. But now you go to the movie theater, unless it's an event kind of movie, that there are a lot of movies that don't play better in the theater than they play in your home. And we have to think through that for what films we're going to see in the theaters in the future. So is it having an experience that is different? And I'm a believer that it has to be different. You cannot duplicate it in the home by just playing back. Like I asked my daughter before I came here, and she says, well, I download the exact print at home that I see in the movie theater. The exact same, edit, the exact same sound quality, except if it's an Atmos or something like that, a 3D sound, but it's, a proper mix. And she goes, useful sometime, 5 years from now, going to be less useful because the quality is going up in the house. I mean, look at what's happening to the NFL right now. The NFL is finding out that they have to secretly have sponsors buy out venues because people want to watch the game at home. It's a better experience at home. And that's going to start happening more and more in the theater unless the quality goes up, unless it's more than drink holders. And I think you have to start having other things.
Bob Lambert said, I think he should be mentioned here today, years ago,
Always.
that as long as there were unmated members of the species, he thought there would be a better chance for people to want to go to a movie theater than, let's go watch a movie at my parents' house tonight.
I think there's a
With
case
3D
in point
glasses.
for differentiating what you can see in the movie theater to what you see at home, and 3D was certainly and continues to be a case in point for that. For those of you who were at CinemaCon last week, the top-grossing movies of 2013, there were 26 of them featured in the reel, and 17 of them were released in 3D. So 3D has created an experience that is not possible to replicate easily, certainly in the home. And as we look into the future, are there other experiences similar to that we can do? Obviously, adding the third dimension, adding a fourth dimension probably isn't all that practical.
Smell-o-vision.
Yeah. But looking at that as an example of something that has successfully allowed exhibitors to charge a premium for the experience, so customers will pay more for a 3D experience. And certainly the success of the major movies last year was driven by 3D.
Any more thoughts on 3D?
Well, I'd like to ask the audience, how many people saw Gravity in 3D? And how many saw it in 2D? And how many saw it in both? And which one would you prefer? I mean, that's a rhetorical question, but I mean, to me, that movie was a 3D movie through and through from start to end.
But let's be clear, it's an artistic use of 3D because in the real world, your 3D depth perception ends at about a 20-foot radius, and gravity had depth cues on the stars, so, as well as the clouds down on the planet. So it was just understand, Matt, it's being used as a creative tool. There are going to be movies that are appropriate for 2D. There are going to be movies for 3D. I actually completely disagree that the 3D is responsible for the box office. It just happened to be movies with really good stories where you were using 3D and using it as part of the leverage of that story. Because they're also, you know, Hunger Games was not 3D. It did okay at the box office.
But you don't like 3D?
I guess the question in the audience is how many people avoid seeing the movie in 3D if they have the choice at the right time?
Well, I think that's got a lot to do with brightness in 3D. That's been one of the big.
I would agree.
Here.
I think everybody knows that and unfortunately we're at the age of dark movies too, right? I mean, Hobbit and all.
So we're starting to move down that path with bringing new technologies in. And Chris, in his keynote, brought up the issue of business models. And business models drive these things and drive the technologies that we actually see in the cinema. So where do we see this evolving? We have this whole new layer, this whole new investment of digital cinema projectors, and they're not bright enough for 3D. To get them brighter means more investment, newer things. Do we stop there? Do we keep going with this? And do we need to take a big leap forward, or do we need to take small leaps?
It's an interesting question. I don't have an answer to, but it's a good point. I mean, you know, digital cinema just started in 2000, and now we're saying it's pretty ubiquitous now in 2014. And prior to that, exhibitors would buy a film projector, and it would be good for 25, 30 years with reasonable maintenance. And now these laser projectors look spectacular, and clearly are going to be a better way to present 3D movies than current xenon lamp house projectors. But now, do you impose upon the exhibitors, okay, it's time to reinvest on your plant and equipment again already?
I mean, I think the question of whether the economics of a theater, can afford going forward with yet another generational technology is going to be tough, right? I mean, I think you're seeing it a little bit, though. I mean, maybe we'll see a bifurcation of the theaters, the way that IMAX at some level is a bifurcation of the theater experience, and now you have Atmos for bifurcation of the theater experience, and maybe that's just going to continue. You're going to have the higher, the higher quality theater, and you're going to have the medium quality theater, and those are going to end up with expanding, and you're going to see that probably more, the 1% theater type model. I mean, you're already seeing it already with the ones where you're paying extra to have the seat that you wanted, at the time you want. So,
well, I think that raises the question of, as we look at the increasing the creative palette that we talked about at the beginning of this session, are any of those dimensions actually going to allow the exhibitor to charge more for the ticket, or will the customers be willing to pay more for higher dynamic range or for increased color gamut? And I think the answer is probably not. It's theater environment issues, or it's
but people are paying more for an IMAX experience. They are paying more for 3D experience. So they already chosen two that they're willing to pay more for.
That's right, but that's a differentiated large format situation. I mean, IMAX has a really strong brand, strong expectation of seeing a higher performance at the theater, and IMAX delivers that. You can pay me later. And
thank you.
Right, but we're at the early days of high dynamic range or high frame rate and stuff like that. There might be a package of those together that might make people willing to pay
Honey,
more.
what are the theaters tonight? I don't know, honey. There's this Indian one. That's not in high dynamic range. Oh, yeah, but it's what's it? I know they ask how it's rated on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm sorry, they don't. They want to know the reviews. They don't care whether it's high dynamic range or whether
No, but
it's high brightness.
you choose the movie, but then you choose the theater. So I mean, people choose the movie, and then they say, "Oh, where's that playing?" And many times
That I agree.
Right, and then they go, "Oh, it's playing on IMAX, or it's playing at a theater that you can get reserved seating." And I'd say that
I
does.
just mentioned. Yeah, I agree with that.
it's playing at 6:30, and that's when I'm here.
Yeah, one thing I think we need to remember, SMPTE has brought out standards, and it's 14-foot Lamberts for a 2D movie, and we all have to work together in this community. IMAX can't sustain the the whole industry. But if you went to see 2D movies at 14-foot Lamberts in your local theater, you know how many times it's really at 14-foot Lamberts? Not very many times. And I think you'd see an increase in people going to movies if they're projected properly. And I think if they're going to pay more, we're going to get more people in. I think higher dynamic range, higher brightness, increased color palette will just be even better for the audience. They'll eventually understand that, because you're right, TV presentations are getting pretty good. So we've got to work together to at least get the standards we have now, and IMAX does that. Our standard is actually 22, so we're 60% brighter. But I see many regular theaters I go into, they're nowhere near 14.
The other thing you have to do, and I think NATO's trying to figure this out, is the theater's empty, Monday through Thursday, right? And, so it's an empty box. And given that they're in the real estate rental business, and if it's going to be dynamic pricing that's going to change, drag people out, I don't know. There are going to be some experience that are going to happen in order to sustain the model. And I think one of them is filling the theater during the week.
I'm going to stay out of this one.
Well, I always felt that with the upside of digital cinema is it's so much cheaper to deliver content to the theater. There are opportunities when there's there's just no one in the theaters on Monday and Tuesday nights especially. Is that a night that you can air some classic movie? Would people go see Episode 4 Star Wars on that night if it's showing in a special theater, or Casablanca, or Gone with the Wind? But there's the complexities is how they collect box office. That when I talked to once Jeff Goldstein about Warner Brothers about it, that was one of the barriers, how they attribute the box office and how they collect it.
We need to fill that with those time frames with Troll 2 and also The Room. I think those things would be great.
For the Apple.
For those that know those movies.
So if we jump ahead, if we step forward 10 years and then look back at where we are today, are we going to think that today this was really dark ages, or are we going to see more of the same?
I'm going to kind of answer your question, but to kind of address something that David said. The brightness in theaters thing, when I was director of post-production at Disney in 1988, that was a huge problem then, and we'd preview our theaters all over the country, and we'd go into theaters and find they were running at 5-foot Lamberts in Monroe, Louisiana. And you'd open the lamp house and find that the lamp was actually black inside, the xenon lamp. And if it's to David's point, is that it's about that quality of experience, because when we were in DCI, we realized we're going to set all these specs, and at the end of the day, it's still going to rely on the exhibitor whether they actually allow the lamp to have enough current to give full brightness on the screen to maintain that experience. I don't know if these laser projectors, do they draw less current? Because it seems like at the end of the day, the theater owners care about what they're spending on their power bill, but it's those things that need to be addressed. Kind of Hollywood and the people at this NAB conference and the technology, we're developing technologies that really can improve the experience, but then it's the last mile, so to speak, how it's actually presented in the theater. Are your feet sticking to the floor?
To your point on dialing the laser power, lasers currently draw approximately the same power for the same light output as xenon. But the opportunity with laser is, first of all, the lamp doesn't run down. The lifetime on lasers is tens of thousands of hours before.
That's perfect.
Yeah, before you get down to 10 or 20% below the original. And so you have the opportunity to have a high-level technician lock the power of the lasers so that for that 10, 20, 30,000 hours, you'll get the prescribed light output, assuming the optics haven't gotten dirty or anything.
Go
like
lasers.
That.
Right, so therefore you don't have to change your lamp for about a year, correct?
Lamp changes, well, you're probably, if you're running the bulb,
Laser changes, right?
If you're running the projector half the time, that's 4,000 hours. So 20,000 hours would be 5 years. Did I do that right? Yeah.
Yes.
So I think getting back to the question that Michael asked was...
That when I worry about then, if you don't have a technician in there, there's things like the focus of the lens and those kind of things. Because remember, we're in an industry now that has no projectionists left, and that's a big issue for me.
I think we're going to look back at this time and say this is when the genie came out of the bottle. I mean, if you look at cinema before, say, 2000, we had film 35 millimeter. We had a double-bladed, triple-bladed shutter. We were at 48 nits on the screen. And now that we've introduced digital, it's like the computer comes into the home. Anything is now possible, right? It's electronic. We can wait to the bleeding end to deliver these things into the theaters. We can work with high dynamic range. We can go to high frame rate. We can start taking off all the bumper pads that we had before, and now you can do just about anything. You may not want to do just about anything, and again, it's going to come down to the storytelling, but I think that's the biggest thing we're going to see looking back towards this time frame. This is when everything just pivoted and took off.
And thinking about that, if that pivot point means that 10 years from now, we actually have different kinds of projectors, laser projectors, projectors that are more capable with HDR capabilities and wider color gamut. Is that where we stop, just the projectors? The media block changed? Have we changed other things that we've been kind of holding sacred up till now?
I think you change it all.
Yeah, I agree. I think you change it all. I mean, I think that we're just at the beginning of a more immersive sound experience. I think everybody in the home has realized if they upgrade their sound, it's better, than upgrading their flat panel TV set. I mean, how do you make it so that when you get in there that you're completely taken away from the seat, that you're sitting in? Is that bigger screens? Is it 360 degrees? I mean, remember all the old stuff, 360. Everybody, laughs now, but you look at the virtual reality. This is like the third time for virtual reality. I mean, but now with the ability of technology to kind of build those experiences. I mean, there's a startup now where I live where they're doing film, where they're going to do a 360 camera, and that's what they're going to shoot everything in. They're going to try to finance some films that way and bring them out on, not go straight to, virtual reality. Obviously, it's immature there, but I think the theater will keep up. I think the theater has to keep up.
Yeah, they may laugh at us for trying to pump light from the back of the room up to a big screen, right? When you just grow it up there someday in the front, and you just show it from an emissive system in the front instead of a reflective system off of a screen. So these are all the things that could be a possibility sometime in the future.
And I also know that, the controversial thing is the second screen in the movie theater. People, but I think at some level that's just an inevitability. I mean, the same way, if you were in Vegas, 20 years ago, you weren't allowed to use your cell phone when you walk through there. You're not allowed, it's just, I don't know. I grew up in the city, in New York City, and when I was a kid, everybody, participated with the movie. And now I think, with multiple screens and stuff like that, the notion of participating with the movie is going to actually be brought to bear by creatives.
I, for one, am looking forward to when I sit in a theater seeing a whole bunch of iPad screens in front of me.
I understand that. I get that. But how many people who at home sit there without just watching? I mean, I think it's, I think there might be, two types of, there are people who participate and people who just sit back. I think participation is actually going to be key. And that's how a theater environment expands and becomes something better than your home. I mean, I bet you 10 years from now, your home theater is going to be unbelievable. And therefore, how do I drag you out? You're going to be 10 years older. How am I dragging you to the theater? I think you have to have something else.
I think you have to have a big immersive screen.
You might be right. At least one.
I also think
at that answer.
I also think nothing is ubiquitous. I think the Nightmare Before Christmas second screen event, people went in knowing what that was and what they were getting into. It doesn't mean that suddenly all movies will be second screen events, because we all know, they've all read the articles where a fight breaks out because some guy got mad at somebody texting during a movie theater, during a movie screening. So not all people want to have see those second illumination devices.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying that, but if we're going 10 years down the road, okay, there is an aging population in America, so therefore, and actually in a lot of other countries in Eastern Europe and Japan, what is the experience going to be that brings them in? Maybe it is the old traditional experience. What is going to bring an 8-year-old today, who's now 18 years old, into the theater? I think it's got to be a different experience. And maybe it's not second screen the way we think of it, or it's a special cut of the movie that's in the theaters, or even a participatory live event, or where, Chris Cookson brought up, maybe the story morphs, based on the audience, there in the sentiment of the audience. Those are the things that are going to be compelling to be in a social environment.
You're sensing through your seats that you're afraid, so we'll make you more afraid.
the choose your own adventure in theaters has been tried many times and never quite stood up, because I think you've got 6,000 years of storytelling where people are sitting around a campfire. They don't just suddenly go to the person telling a story. Hold on a second. Now I want you to tell the story this direction. It's because you're being, as what Chris was talking about, it's compelling storytelling that actually is pulling you along through the story, and you're riveted to the story.
Okay, let's look at the music industry right now. If you asked, for up until the last 5 years, until like EDC, electronic dance music, came out, it was all about, having bands playing on the stage. Now you look at the most happening, most exciting thing in music, it's DJs up there doing, mixes with live dancers around them, and with a lot of other things that make an immersive experience in a way that is completely different than the old jazz club that we all grew up with. So I do think there needs to be change, and we're talking 10 years from now, not 5 years from now.
I was talking 7.5.
So David, well,
I'm with you,
IMAX
though. I would rather go see a great theater, like just a great sound and great nobody texting in front of me.
Do live performers come with IMAX's next projector?
Live performance? We've done live performance. I remember
David gets his guitar up there. It's so embarrassing.
It's amazing. Hans Zimmer, we've done live orchestra in front of the IMAX screen, and we're considering doing that again, maybe.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, that's obviously a destination movie now on steroids, right? Seeing, the score performed. I live in Palo Alto, and we have, the live organist plays a lot sometimes down at the old theater there that's, owned by Hewlett Packard. David Packard. Yeah, from David Packard. And you know what? It actually changes the experience. It truly changes the experience.
I'm going to delve back into technical stuff. So one of the favorite topics of Rob's is 2K enough?
Enough for what?
Depends on if they're serving alcohol at the concession center.
The most important is what I mentioned earlier. The most important is what you're capturing at, which also complements what David was saying, IMAX being the ultimate Uber capture medium. Because what's more important is at the headwaters of the process, you want to capture as high resolution as you can possible. My disappointment when I was that thing I talked about with Bill Kinder earlier, I was consulting for Sony at the time. And I was, the whole point, I was there to help them get really good elements to show off the 4K projector. And what I saw was, oh my God, the 2K projector looks effectively in that environment. And David's right, it probably contrast, it had a lot to do with brightness, but in that environment, which was the Entertainment Technology Council's Digital Cinema Lab, it was a pretty tweaked, spot-on theater. A 4K master on the 2K projector looked, for all intents and purposes, as good as the 4K projector. And that's my concern, is for exhibitors, because we're not in the medical imaging business, do we burden the theater owners with having to put in 8K projection when actually, right now, what audience members are walking out of Gravity, Hunger Games, name your movie, and saying, oh, I can't handle that 2K projector anymore. They're not even conscious of it.
To get to the
1570 though was an example of high resolution in the cinema on film. So that was your company's.
But I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think people tend to always want to categorize things and put resolution in one pocket and high dynamic range or dynamic range in another one. They are married together. You cannot separate these two. So we need to stop talking, is it resolution, is it dynamic range, and talk about the whole complete thing, because look at that contrast sensitivity slide. You see it right there in black and white in front of you.
It's the modulation transfer function.
Exactly.
And on top of that,
And MTF, too.
as we go to this higher dynamic range, higher contrast, higher brightness, what we really have to pay attention to is ambient light in the theater. And that's going to be a huge issue as we move forward, because we're going to be able to project those great blacks. But if all those stair lights, because of antiquated exit laws and fire marshal laws, obviously it has to be safe. We have to be very careful of that as we build out, because you won't get that great experience in that storytelling if you can't see it like the filmmaker saw when he finished it in a proper venue. So we've got to think about ambient light big time as we move forward.
But to answer your question, I think the current theater, projection systems are going to turn out in 5 or 10 years to be inadequate. I think they're just not going to have the dynamic range. They're not going to have the gamut. I think we're going to, P3 gamut is, we're going to expand beyond it in ways that, some people do in various theaters, but I think it's just the beginning.
Right, but remember, these gentlemen, exhibition has spent a lot of money very recently, and they didn't spend money for 40 years on a projector. They think they're going to last. But if as Rob said, if you capture at a very high, dynamic range and resolution, they're a 2K projector. If the lamp is right, and if the optics are clean and it's focused and there's no ambient light in the theater, they'll have still a pretty good presentation 5 years from now.
Agreed. But still, it's going to be dimmer, though, than when somebody starts seeing a laser,
I'm
a
sorry,
true 14.
I'm sorry, Steve, but in 1981, when I saw Black Stallion in a theater at 16-foot Lamberts on a film screen, it looked pretty frickin' awesome, and nobody was going out, wow, Caleb Deschanel's cinematography is so lacking because it's not at 40-foot Lamberts. I just...
No, but have you been in a 3D movie where it's like sub
3D.
3D
must be up there.
Okay, all right, but you have been in a theater where you go, God, that was dark.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
So we're getting near the end of this session. I'd like to open up to questions from the audience.
Hello, Michael Schroeder with Microsoft. For me, a formative video was Episode 4, a formative movie because I saw it in the theater. Episode 4, Star Wars, and I have kids who now love Star Wars, but they've never seen it as I saw it in the cinema. And that goes for everything from Lawrence of Arabia to all of the classics. And those are the kind of things that I would love to be able to share the experience, the surround, the full breadth of the experience that I got in the theater with my kids, and have people who did not see Gravity in the theaters this year be able to see it in 5 years in a theater.
Agreed. In 97, in the re-release of Episode 4, the big trailer for it, they showed a TV screen. For the past 20 years, you've only seen Star Wars on this small screen. And then, it made unbelievable box office on that re-release in 97, showing it on the big screen.
As we go down, that's going to be very easy to do, given, that a lot of, whether it's through satellite or IP delivery of films, they'll be able to kind of truly, one of the things you're seeing in music is where they're doing kind of pre-selling of venues for acts going to that. I think you'll see that happening in some venues where they'll just sit there and say, can we get 3 nights of sold out to see Lawrence of Arabia? And they can pre-sell it, and then they can deliver the film relatively rapidly if it's been mastered and ready.
And I agree with you. I think this is something that theaters could take more advantage of. I know the ArcLight in Hollywood is starting to do some of these things. I myself, big fan of Citizen Kane, never saw it in the theater. Would love to see it in the theater. This is a crime that I haven't seen it.
When I finally saw it, Howard, it was a completely different experience.
It's got to be.
So
It's got to be. So things like that, things like Lawrence of Arabia in a really true 70 millimeter type 65.
But Jar Jar Binks in UHD?
Yeah, well, how about Howard the Duck? I'm looking forward to that one in 4K.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Vince Mata, Cinematographers Guild. Two of the best viewing systems that I've ever seen in my life were, Image Maximum, IMAX, and ShowScan. My question is if there will ever be a combo of the two. 15
there was
per...
IMAX HD.
Yeah, well, we had Hobbit 1, we had 50 theaters in high frame rate. Hobbit 2, we had about 125. So, our systems are capable, our digital systems, of high frame rate. In fact, IMAX, we did a movie called Momentum 25 years ago at IMAX HD, which is 48 frames a second. So we've always experimented and tried to raise the bar, but our digital systems and our laser systems will be capable of 48 frames a second.
And I haven't seen you, David, in 25 years. MGM Optical Effects, Lynn Law. Yeah, it's been a while.
You made a good point, though. I
Tell
just
me
remembered
hasn't changed.
ShowScan was at 30-foot Lamberts. That's right. When we showed it at the National, it was at 30-foot.
And ShowScan was unbelievable when I saw it in Culver City.
It was like 3D without glasses.
Without glasses. Real deal.
Remember when the guy came through?
Yeah.
The guy came through the screen?
Behind the
That
screen.
was unbelievable.
Yeah, I thought it was...
brainstorm.
I thought it was the guy with the
Hold
film.
on, everyone. We're just having a little moment here.
Yeah, you guys want to get a room or something? Yeah.
And then when the film burned up.
Miss those Chuck E. Cheeses.
Oh,
Next.
hi. Robbie Stuvlin, freelance editor, writer, director, whatever. I just wanted to open up by saying that this has been my favorite panel so far. You guys are finally speaking my language, so thank you for coming out. You guys talked about people in the theater being asked, like, what was the thing that they felt was missing, and you said that it was cup holders.
It was in the 1980s, to be fair.
Right, well...
Cup holders were this new thing back then.
Well, what I was most interested in was that in how it's related to people still going to theaters today. You guys have been talking about a lot of movies like Gravity and Dark Knight, but one of the most polarizing films that I saw recently was The Hobbit. When that movie came out, midnight premiere, I saw it at Universal City Walk, and there were two big groups of people. You know, I was in the regular 3D crowd. People saw it 2D standard, and then people saw it 3D IMAX high frame rate. And I can tell you guys what they felt when they walked out of it. Their theater their projector malfunctioned, and they had to walk out of the theater halfway through. But pretty much, as I've been reading about people talking about high frame rates and 3D, I've noticed that pretty much across the board, people aren't really accepting it as great as the studios have been wanting them to. And I was wondering, are the studios still doing a lot of those surveys? Are they trying to find out what's working and how to...
That was NATO, by the way, that did that survey, but just a real 30-second quickie. In the late 1980s, let's not forget that 24p video was becoming established because, big shock to Eastman Kodak, the film look had more to do with the frame rate than it had to do with anything else. Leon Silverman was involved with that, as was Chris Cookson a lot, with the 24p video. It had a more film look. So I always thought it was very funny when The Hobbit was showing at 48 frames per second, everyone's shocked that everybody thought it looked like video. Well, of course, it's what you're used to, and that's more of an accommodation. I think as more people see high frame rate stuff, maybe they'll get used to it, but you touched on an interesting point. Again, that's why I think Chris's point is so valid. People will be able to make any frame rate they want. Like the artist, I forget, it was like at 20 frames a second or something, 22? Yeah, they intentionally slowed it down a bit because of it being a silent movie.
But I mean, you got to realize that that's one of the first uses of high frame rate, in the theater, and it's a new tool. And as everybody learns to use this tool, I think you'll find places where it's incredibly useful. Whether particularly in certain high motion and certain other kind of uses that will make it, go, thank God it wasn't that high frame rate. And 48 is just the beginning, right? I mean, it's really was what was possible then. I mean, if you get up into, we were talking earlier about what is your visual ability to see a frame rate, and I don't know what's the number you said? Was it?
Well, it's
hundreds
what
of
you're not
frames per
touching on
second.
too is Dave Stump can speak to this better than I can, but to shoot with a 180-degree shutter, your frame rate must divide into twice the line frequency in order so that the fluorescent lights and things will so that it won't flicker.
So to answer your question from the student side, yes, absolutely. We're playing around with everything we possibly can. But the one thing I think that at least our studio has done a pretty good job with, in a certain extent, is we've looked at, is it helping the story, right? Is this frame rate, this choice, this 3D, this 2D, this high dynamic, is it going to help the story? And I think that's the first question you have to ask. It's not just to do something because you can, but is it going to push the story along? And so I think that's the question we're trying to start with every time. And as a filmmaker yourself, you kind of should, you know this and you see it yourself. What is going to get this story best across the audience so they can relate to it?
Are a lot of studios still going to be paying attention in the future to how audiences are reacting and responding to 48 frames?
That's our bread and butter. We have to, right? Otherwise, we're out of business.
I think Disney, more than any other studio, experiments like that, and Howard kind of takes the lead in that arena of doing camera tests and sharing them with the rest of the community. Disney does a great job of that.
And I think we should all applaud Peter Jackson for bringing out Hobbit and experimenting with this. And I think it's a great testament to helping. What does that do to the storytelling? And I think one point, the bit depth, that's the color palette. I think there's a thing that we have to continue to experiment. Maybe high frame rate needs more bits, and I think that might take away from. Some people say it has a little bit of a plastic look, and that's probably bit depth. So we're all learning. Remember that the motion picture business is like 125 years old, and we're into like year 10 or 15 of digital cinema. It's a new way of storytelling, and we're all experimenting.
Cool. Thank you very much.
First a comment, then my question. 2 years ago, we talked about second screen here. I was worried I was going to get booed off the stage. Actually, the audience said, yeah, it's coming. Tomorrow, Disney's going to talk about it. Rob, like it or not, you're showing your age. Maybe they'll make an iPod, only section and an old folks non-iPod section, but sooner or later, it's going to come.
Well,
That's a comment, no rebuttal allowed. The question, though, Michael Cioni this morning kind of put out a challenge. He said there's a horse race. Technology is continuing to advance. And it's interesting hearing you guys debate up here about 2K, 4K, bit depth and everything. Meanwhile, over the internet, we heard this morning, it's happening. So the question is, as Chris Cookson aptly said, storytelling is storytelling. How it gets delivered, the technology approaches are changing. Do you see the internet as a competitive threat to the future of cinema?
No more than
I don't hear anything now, Rob.
Well, everything's a competitive threat. The thing is that when you have a good story, you don't have to worry about it. Look how well Avatar did. It was just, 5 years ago. The internet existed then as well. Cinema had competition from radio, and then it had competition from television and radio. And so,
I think if you look at the example of Frozen, it actually helped the movie.
Right.
So I don't think it's competitive in a certain extent. I think it actually, you look at that language thing that Leon showed earlier, that has made more people worldwide aware of that movie, and hence it continues to keep going along.
And I guess, given Chris's definition of cinema being storytelling, I should clarify by theatrical presentation of stories versus going at home with this new technology that gives me better images, surround sound, interactivity, all the things Chris talked about with my own popcorn. And all the cup holders and wine.
And your teenager coming in late at night interrupting everything, right?
We have 2 more questions,
Okay, anyway,
and that's all we have time for, if we have that much time. Wolf?
No. Okay.
No time?
Hello. Yes, my name.
This has to be 30-second question.
Okay, then I drop that. The nastiest question I could have asked is, in 10 years from now, will we have at least 1 woman on stage? But I'm not going to ask that question. I've been visiting you folks for about, I think, 15 years now. I was up with the whole development of putting up digital cinema. I was engaged by German government because I'm from Germany to do all the evaluation for the Fraunhofers on 3Ds. And suddenly we're here again on the Artists Guild. Suddenly we are again in the craftsmanship trying to make good cinema. And in my view and in my question, I think it's something good, but coming from Europe, I have to accept that you doing cinema is for you the most important job in the field of artist work anyway. And so this is a very exciting meeting here to be with you and to see how much care and how much effort to do in this industry. But really asking the question about 10 years from now or 15, I think you still have a long, long way to go. And it's in the end, it will be very simple because you don't have to stick in 3D. You have to rediscover your old virtues as there have been in The Artist and all the other films coming up. And you have to find out what is the founding element. So SEMTI will be another 100 years. I think this is an immense statement. And how you will do my question is, how will you continue with cinema in a time where everything is fragmented and as was just put out, Genie has been come out of the box. My guess is that you have to rearrange the artistic values as well as the technology values and the age. You have to get back the women and you have to get the young people. They are not here anymore, and if you don't get them back, you are lost, guys. Goodbye.
Well said. I'm going to get shot, but please, Bob.
So you made a number of comments about the brightness of the image, and in particular, the 3D brightness and everything. So, I just want to make a comment with the advent of laser projection technology. That issue should be gone when those installations come out. And to that, we strongly believe that there should be no laser projection installation. In fact, the minimal requirement for any theater putting in a laser projection installation, the system requirement should be that 3D presentation should be able must be able to be shown at full brightness, 14-foot Lamberts, as a minimum requirement for any installation to be accurate. And that's projected on a white screen, so that you can get true 3D representation of the content. And by doing that, you solve all the comments that you made regarding brightness of the image. And you know, when theater owners look for installation and acquiring of laser projection, they should make that a minimal requirement for their theater.
We'll have to do virtual power bill paying, though.
Hear, hear. Well, thank you very much, and please give a warm applause to our panelists.